Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the newest episode of the In Production podcast. Today, I'm excited to invite our newest guest, Peter. Please tell us more about yourself.
Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Peter Hondrogiannis. I started in the banking business, and I'm going to date myself here, probably about 26 years ago.
Millennium.
Never thought I was going to be a banker, to be quite honest with you. It was not what I was studying in school. And, as I kind of got hooked in the financial space, I started my journey with TD Bank, so a large Canadian bank. And, luckily for me, it really stuck and was, something that was transformative in me. So I started kind of just in a branch and serviced customers. From that point on, I moved into kind of where I really cut my teeth in the fraud and AML space. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people consider me a fraud guy. So, I love the title. I love fraud. I love, chasing fraudsters and seeing kind of what they're utilizing today in AI, how I can use AI to help combat them. And, again, in my journey of my career, I started moving to different organizations. So luckily I went into, after 14 successful years at TD Bank and in a variety of different leadership roles, I went to a company called Millennium One Solutions, which then became NTT, big Japanese telecommunication company, BPO,
Mm-hmm.
got to head up, their big accounts and offer end-to-end service to our clients, including fraud and AML, and, started the AI journey probably about 3 years ago with them
Mm-hmm.
and really started working on implementing AI into their call centers, their back office, decision making. And then really a great opportunity at Equifax came about, which I took about a year and a little bit more than a year and a half ago. And it's been all time AI. So really luckily we had gone through, our cloud transformation,
Mm-hmm.
became cloud native. And now it's really about utilizing AI and the tools that we can and really helping our customers, helping, streamline processes and really delivering on some of the challenges that we have in front of us to protect client data, to protect customers, and making sure that we're using AI in a very responsible way. So it's a great journey. And, I'm very excited to be here to kind of talk about some of the learnings that I've had over the last 26 years
Mm-hmm.
and excited. So thank you for having me.
This is exciting, and I'm very curious in your perspective, primarily because I've seen the post that you wrote from about a month ago. And the main idea of that post was that, we need to stop pushing back on the race of making everything AI. And that may sound a bit controversial, from the person whose whole job and position is to drive AI enablement within the company. And that seems like, the knowledge from the trenches, something that only you know because you're actually doing it on every day. And people that are sitting in boardrooms and never see what actually happens on the ground, they want to push and they want to raise, but they do not understand all the nuances. So can you please tell us a little bit more into the audience? Why did you make that post? What was your, can you develop the point of that?
Yeah, and listen, I got a lot of different opinions on that post from a lot of different people. Some, were supportive, some, questioned, how, like you said, how can you be an AI leader and
Mm-hmm.
question about the pace of AI? I think it's a great question you're asking because I think one of the things that I found in talking to other, senior leaders is that they actually struggle to answer that question themselves.
Mm-hmm.
For me, my post is really it's just a call to do due diligence, right? Because it appears that right now we're in what I call the AI gold rush. So
Mm-hmm.
everything has to be AI at the speed of a gold rush, right? Where people are moving and doing things and, they're not really kind of looking at the end to end perspective of what they should be, considering if they're going to go through an AI solution implementation. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, often, what I found in talking to other leaders is that they're getting burned when they get to that, post production, hypercare and everything else, because there's a clear lack of understanding of the architecture, the tokenization costs,
Mm-hmm.
agentic resources that you're going to need either to implement the AI and even support it as a BAU or any type of like downstream platform costs. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where, a lot of leaders that I've spoken to are now taking all of those things into consideration before, implementing AI. Well, others aren't. So that's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my post was really about, how can we do some due diligence up front? Do we know, is AI the right solution for every process change that you're looking to make? Could it
Hmm.
be just a process reengineering? Could it be that AI can assist, some portions of your process and not the whole,
Yeah.
flow through? So I think that's where, some leaders have, differentiating opinions. Some want to, move at the, the speed of sound. And unfortunately, that's sometimes
Then
where
they
you
face a bill like this. They face a bill and
that's exactly it, right? Where the funny thing is I've actually talked to some leaders and they said, my AI implementation costs and platform fees and everything else are actually more than what I was paying before when I had human in the loop. So it's it's one of those things where you need to map it out properly, because if you don't, that's where you might find some surprises at the end. And I'm hoping that as more and more leaders, get accustomed to having these tough conversations with their senior leaders,
Mhm.
that, they can say, hey, maybe this might not be the right implementation. Maybe we need to go a different route, or maybe we need to consider the costs of doing this based on platform fees, agentic rules that we're going to need to hire for, anything else that might come up. Tokenization is a huge one, right?
Yeah.
Are we using the right tokens? Are we using, tokens that are expensive versus, localized tokens that might be cheaper to do the same job? So there's a whole kind of economics behind this that has to be considered before you can go through it.
Hmm. Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with you because I had experiences where I spoke with leaders and they just jumped the gun into AI and never really sitting and calculating ROI. And you also said about it that before you actually do anything, hey, let's sit down, let's do the ROI math. That is the mathing. And I'm curious whether it was changed based on your experience in fraud, because spending so much time, that creates a certain mindset that's going to be, you're going to have a very different mindset from the person that is just based in technology, right? So I'm trying to understand what you just said. Is the root of this in your past experiences that you got in fraud, or what did your past experience in fraud teach you about implementing AI right now that you are using, and you feel as like your competitive advantage against other leaders that unfortunately doesn't have that experience?
Good question. I think when you look at, say, someone that might be like a pure technologist, they focus kind of on tool capabilities, implementation time frame. Whereas in fraud, I have close to 2 decades in fraud and risk.
Hmm.
For me, it's, what are some of the, hidden security gaps that I'm going to have to close? Are there privacy issues that I need to ensure that any type of agentic AI or implementation is going to protect that information? Is it something that fraudsters will try to attack with AI? So I always kind of have that fraud and risk mindset, and it's not to slow down the implementation of AI. Again, I think it has to do with due diligence. Like, we don't want to break something that, we have, regulatory or legal, safeguards in place by trying to implement an AI that might expose something. So for
Hmm.
me, like, real-time translation tools seem beneficial, right? But when I put on my fraud hat, how does that verbatim transcription affect, personal information capture or exposure,
Hmm.
right? How can we verify that our data is encrypted in transit? So these are some of the things that I think, inherently
Hmm.
come easy to someone that's been in the fraud and risk space. We also put on our fraudster hats and say, how can I exploit this?
Hmm.
Right. So that's one of the things that I typically, look at as a first, if I'm going to implement this, if I'm a fraudster, how do I attack this? It's almost a little bit like white hat hacking, right? So, what could I do to break this? What could I do to challenge this? What can I do to, say an agentic AI in the call center? What questions could I ask it to potentially help tip off maybe, some of the answers they're looking for authentication or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's things that I kind of look at as a fraud, fraud expert. And we try to run, like, security reviews with them. We work closely with our security, legal, and compliance teams when we're implementing AI. So
Hmm.
I think there's a way to do it properly. And again, that's what I think differentiates me in terms of, someone that's pure, technology, pure AI, is that I will look at, how to manipulate documents, what deepfakes could be done to beat the biometrics.
To break
So
the
I think
system,
that's where,
essentially. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. What about when we go into fraud, there is a lot of incidents. And often the agent that is making the decision on how to resolve an incident is creating like a unique solution for a unique situation. There is an SOP that he has to follow, but I mean,
Mhm.
life is life and a lot of things happen. AI excels very well when it has good reasoning, good data, and good governance around it. So, like, these two things seem very contradictory. So, do you have a silver bullet for getting AI resolve those, like, complex cases where, the SOP is not existing literally because every case is unique?
Yeah, I think so. If I understand correctly, I think we're looking at, a human in the loop decision making versus an AI decision making, right? So, when I look at that, and that's a very, especially in the fraud space and AML space right now, is, can we have AI make decision on complex cases?
Hmm.
I like to think that this is a kind of a friction point that a lot of people kind of get into, because when you take something like nuanced and, heuristic based judgment of a veteran, fraud investigator,
Hmm.
and attempt to force it into kind of a rigid, deterministic automated flow, you run the immediate risk of, logic flattening.
Yeah.
So, documented process is usually like a happy path abstraction, but, an experienced agent, will use kind of what we call that gut instinct to kind of say that these things line up. Yes, the process is taking me this, is telling me
Hmm.
this, and to follow this, but am I picking up on subtle signals that simply aren't written in my manual? So, for me, when we try to encode that judgment directly, it often fails because we're attempting to make a machine know everything up front, right? So that's the challenge. So my approach to kind of solving this, it's a two-pronged approach. The first thing I would say is an orchestrated hybridity. So, you don't try to encode the final judgment into the automation.
Hmm.
So we encode like the data gathering and the evidence staging.
Hmm.
We let the machine handle the high volume lifting, automation, document matching, case classification, but we preserve that human in the loop for the final verdict on those truly ambitious and ambiguous cases that we call, gray areas or close calls.
Hmm.
So we treat the automation as a support and the human as the final arbiter of risk. So I
Okay.
think that's where, the first aspect. And then the second is like LLM as a judge. So, we can use a secondary Q agent, right?
Hmm.
That functions as our institutional memory.
Yeah,
So if
just
our
like a
human
checkup.
agents are,
Yeah.
pardon?
Sorry, yeah, just a memory and checkup to see, to compare the decision.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, right? So if our human agents are consistently like overriding an AI suggested decision, that isn't a failure for me.
Hmm.
It's actionable data, right? We need to find those outcomes back into the model, like, and put them and feed them back in,
Hmm.
as a feedback loop. So, the way that the system doesn't just execute a strategic rule, it observes, it evolves based on how our best people are actually solving problems in production. So that's how I would balance kind of the two different interpretations of, someone who has years of experience of fraud and making them the final arbiter, and utilizing AI and kind of setting up the case holistically, and then having a final decision with a human in the loop.
I think this is a good model because it allows you to get, the best from the both worlds. At the same time, you also mentioned this partially. So whenever a person has to override the suggestion that AI is giving to it, so like there is a gap between where the leadership wants company to go, then what company can actually build, like what you as the leader can give as the tool to your frontline staff. And then there is the frontline staff, like what they want to use and their own problems because maybe they think that this tool is like replacing them or whatever. How do you cross that gap between what leadership is saying, hey, we need to do this, you sitting on the reality, understand what can be built, and then with the frontline staff that may have their own fears of this new technology or just not know how to use, or they can say, oh, I'm busy, I cannot use this because I'm busy. Like I'm already busy. I don't have the time for all this AI stuff. Like they see it not as the transformational change, but as one more thing that they have to do now daily. So how do you like close that gap? Do you have any secrets for closing that gap?
Yeah, I don't know if it's, see, I've heard every single one of these, Nick. So it's definitely, pushback that, I have heard, from different teams, but I think the gap itself reveals first in translation layer, right? So the middle
Hmm.
management and teams leads who are caught between strategic vision of the C-suite and the operational reality of the front line. That's, I always say to my guys, I have a 10,000-foot view, right? Teach me, or walk me through the day-to-day stuff, right? Because
Hmm.
that gives me the appreciation of, what the disconnect might be before I do anything, right? So, leadership often views AI as a macro efficiency play, but middle management's responsible for the micro dependencies of every workflow. So the gap shows up when the leadership announces, hey, we have this, new shiny high speed AI rollout, but the frontline teams are still struggling with legacy systems, haven't been integrated, they're dealing with data quality issues. And so that makes your AI output, a little bit unreliable.
Hmm.
So you're right in that respect. It also becomes obvious in the feedback loop. So if leadership is pushing for, speed from the front line, but the frontline team spending 60% of their day correcting AI outputs or troubleshooting, system errors, the organization enters kind of a stealth failure mode.
Hmm.
These metrics might look like adoption high on paper, but the actual productivity is flat or
Hmm.
declining because of the front line is now burdened with this mental tax of validating the machine rather than focusing on the actual work. So I think those are the types of things I look for when I'm kind of implementing, AI with my teams is one, I need to, have subject matter experts and SMEs, at every part of the process from the
Yeah.
discovery, right through DMAIC, right? So what are we doing from a discovery? You need to be telling me these are the challenges. These are what we're trying to solve for. So that when I do go to kind of my more senior leadership and say, hey, this is what we're planning to do, we can articulate what the problems are, how we want
Hmm.
to put AI on top of it, not make it kind of force it down everybody. Like just in the world of change management, you need buy-in. You need to create buy-in. And you're never going to do that if you kind of just force the AI and just hope that
Yeah.
people will adopt it. They have to understand why you're doing it. And you have to understand as a leader that's implementing it, why you want to do it and what problems it's going to solve.
So you're basically like a translator connector in between the two worlds, making sure that they merge.
Yeah.
As the person that, as you said, I've seen it all. You've heard and seen all sorts of piece of resistance and the change management that people are not sure about. What was a surprising piece of resistance for you? What was the thing that you weren't prepared when people started telling you that? You were like, I didn't think about it.
There's a lot. So it's not just one thing, but I think one thing that really surprised me, and again, this comes back from the feedback loop, but it also comes from, just having conversations up front with people that, are going to have AI sit in their world. So the one resistance that I didn't anticipate was not technology being flawed.
Mm-hmm.
It was the fear of intellectual atrophy. So
Mm.
what I mean by that is that I learned that you can't just drop an automation layer on top of a team and call it a win.
Mm-hmm.
So, I learned that we have to pivot our implementation strategy. We stopped framing AI as skip the work and
Mm-hmm.
started framing it as a force multiplier.
Mm.
Right? That
Okay.
allows them to perform the work faster while still requiring them to review the architecture of the answer. We had to prove to that the AI handles the efficiency, but the human retains the responsibility of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
This shift in the conversation of are you replacing your work to are you elevating your role from like a data processor to a decision owner, which ultimately I think gives people faith that all the kind of the some of the grunt work is being done,
Mm-hmm.
but you are ultimately going to make that overview governance decision making. Now I still think that there's we want to make sure that our people understand the solution and what they're doing or what it's doing so that they can continue to learn, because I don't want anyone to feel kind of, as someone comes in new to a team,
Mm-hmm.
they're solely reliant on automation or AI, and they don't know the intricacies of the work that it's doing to make them a decision owner. So I
Okay.
think that's where I kind of found the intellectual atrophy of people kind of solely relying on kind of the automation rather than knowing what it does.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I want to do a question for you for the audience because I'm sure there is somebody who sits in a operational chair, and I bet some of them feel the fear of missing out. They like maybe they have a feeling that they are behind or that everybody is so far away from them in terms of AI implementation and projects that they do not feel well about it. So what would be your first honest move that you would recommend them to do in order to understand that It's okay. If you have this, this, and this, you're fine. Like you don't have to run. Yeah, just focus on like the most important. What would be your piece of advice for that?
I think I always look at it, it's a very simple thing that, you're taught early on, you can't just, run, right? You have to learn to crawl, then walk, then run.
Mm-hmm.
I always say to people, learn to crawl first, right? So use some automations, use some base, automations that you can use through, Gemini or Claude or anything to start, solving small problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I get the whole fear of missing out because everyone's talking about AI. Everyone's talking about these great implementations that they're doing. And everyone's like looking as a leader, you're like, maybe I'm not moving fast enough
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I'm not implementing things that are adding value. But I still think you need to have the base layer of understanding of automations, RPAs, things to that extent. So
Mm-hmm.
what can you learn from that and then build on that process. So I would say then you can learn to kind of at that point walk once you have that base understanding, and from there you can do more complex things that have some decision making in place that that you can feed kind of processes into and have them execute those processes. I think that's the biggest thing
Mm-hmm.
in that walk stage. And then you get to run where you can do these big agentic, transformations like, call center transformations using voice AI or, back office type things where it could process or build, your case for AML based
Mm-hmm.
on, negative media or things like that, that it can pull from the internet. And then at that point, you can still make that decisioning. So I think there's a three phase approach for someone that might have that FOMO that they want to continue to kind of follow that framework, and you will get there.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one thing that I find that could be sometimes detrimental to people is that they go and swing for the fences right off the bat and try
Yeah.
to deliver something without having the base knowledge of automation and AI. And that's why a lot of people, like we talked about earlier, fall into that trap of not knowing the cost of a massive implementation. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I would say, I understand that we all want to move quickly, but really do the due diligence on the base work so that you understand it. And then you can start slowly implementing things and just small things like when I became a leader, in AI, I did small things just to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
I would get it to, give me updates on what's going on in the AI industry, what's going on in fraud. I would, write small codes and, prompt engineering to kind of give me updates when, one of my leaders is emailing me or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Small little things and build, right? And eventually, now I'm doing full on implementations and, in call centers and back office and, everything that's like transformative and has a significant impact to, a positive impact to our customers, to our agents. But I wouldn't have had the ability to do that without having that base knowledge.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And that's true. So many leaders are biting off too much that they cannot
Yes.
chew it all. And what would you say is a good way to measure AI adoption? Because I like to joke that the frontier labs were so happy when the benchmark was the token usage. So like if the company is using a lot of tokens, then this means that the company is doing a lot of adoption. I think that was very popular like 6 months ago and then like a year ago when that became a thing. Right now, it feels like this trend is slowly dying off, that people stop looking at the token spend, they actually start looking at the work done. But I'm curious, in your opinion, what do you think is a good measure that you as the leader can track or can look at to understand, am I doing a good job? Are we moving in the right pace? Do we need to do anything? Do we need to accelerate or we need to slow down?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would say in terms of, usage to utility, right? So you obviously have to have some sort of value mapping when you, implement AI. So what I look at is our agents or our agents utilizing AI for basic administrative tasks, summarizations, drafting emails, quick searches, that's what we call that AI theater, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because it looks
mm-hmm.
like adoption, but the ROI is maybe some time savings,
Five
some
minutes. It's like,
yeah, I mean, it's great if you can implement it in your day to day and it becomes like breathing to you and you get all the information you need, fantastic. But when you look at kind of, an organization and how they're using their AI tokenization and their tokens and everything else, they have to be force multipliers. That's the key term for me is,
Hmm.
are we using AI to solve complex, non-linear problems? Those are actually being used in the system to change decision-making architecture. I think that's where, for me, there's a big differentiation. And when I look at, success in an organization is how heavy is the force multiplying versus the shallow utility, which again, I'm not discounting it. I'm saying these are things that you can do in your day to day that will give you that baseline to be able, like we said in my previous answer, to try to get to utilizing AI as a force multiplier on more complex things. But I think some organizations just stop at that adoption stage and they just read it as adoption. And they
Hmm.
say, we're really doing well in the AI space because, 95% of our people are using, AI in their day to day, but then they don't look at the actual complex, work that's being done. And that might be only 10%.
Hmm.
So I would prefer that you had a bigger mix of, complex things being done by AI than just kind of that, you know, shallow utility type stuff.
Yeah, and it's like the continuation for what we just discussed in the previous question that sometimes people, because they do not know where to start, they start imitating, and this is
Mm,
where the AI theater becomes a thing, because it's easier sometimes just to pretend that you're doing something with AI rather than honestly sitting
correct.
down, looking at the right stats and understanding whether what we did moves the needle. Because, like, I mean, it's a painful realization when you understand that you do not know how to do this thing and you're afraid of it, and not every leader is able to do it. And I think it's like very important to, I assume that this is what you like also pass on to the leaders that you are coaching and mentoring. I mean, for having this certainty in themselves and being curious and not being afraid to, to raise the bar for themselves and for the whole organization.
For sure. I think, for me, I love that people are using AI. I think it's fantastic. You should be using it in your day to day to make your life easier. Where I think in organizations, you really need to start, once you have that, background and you've used it, I think that's where you need to start thinking about what problems can I solve with AI that are, either medium or big size problems. Is
Hmm.
it affecting our customer experience? Is there a better way to do our customer experience? I go back to my days in the call center where, some customers, like even if I thought about this technology, if it was around during COVID times, for example,
Hmm.
people were waiting on the phones because call centers were understaffed. People were waiting for hours. Now think about a voice implementation, a voice agent being able to handle, 95% of the call types that, a customer would ask.
A dream.
Instead of that's where I think with there could have been some really good work being done. And even today, there's call centers. I don't know if you've called into some call centers recently, but I have. And even having to wait 25 minutes, I don't have that time in my day. I have to
Yeah.
take my daughter to soccer practice. I have running around to do. I have work to do. I don't have that time to sit there for 25 minutes on hold, listening to, hold music.
Hmm.
So this is where I would say for me is, and this is what I talk to leaders about, find big projects. Like don't be scared of them. Find things that you can, take a bite one at a time, right? Like, I always joke with my daughter, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I
Exactly.
say that to my leaders as well, because it's sound advice is, don't look at this massive problem that you need to solve. Let's start in little stages,
Hmm.
right? What can we do? Step one, right? What do we need to do to solve this problem? And I think that's been working with a lot of the leaders that I mentor is that, they are starting to think, because they are, a lot of them are very hungry coming up and they want to kind of really make their mark and make an impact. But it's also about, doing it the right way. So
Hmm.
I think that's the advice that I've given a lot of them is, take things, have a clear vision of what you're trying to solve and don't be afraid to take opportunities, but also make sure you're doing the due diligence and make sure that you're, able to achieve those goals that you're putting in front of you.
This is lovely. Thank you so much for insights, for sharing with us. It was an insightful conversation for me. For the audience, whenever somebody wants to get in touch with you, what would be the easiest way to send you a message?
Follow me on LinkedIn, send me a message through there. I'm pretty responsive and, I love interacting with people. So, if you guys have any questions on AI or on development, mentorship, more than happy to help any of the people that come forward that see this podcast and want to reach out. just go under Peter Hondrogiannis and you'll be able to find me.
Amazing. We will leave your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And for the audience, you guys don't be shy. Peter is very open. Thank you so much for your time, Peter. And thank you so much, folks in the audience, for finding the time to listen. Leave your comments, leave your likes, and stay tuned for the next episode. And I think we should do a second one with Peter sooner or later.
Anytime, Nick. More than happy to come back on. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.